Hey, Alec Miller here, founder of Royals and Rogues, and today I'm talking with Mark Cernosia. Mark is the founder of Profanity Creative, a motion design studio working mainly with action sports, as well as the head of Camp Mograph, a retreat for motion designers. In today's episode, we talk about the industry, what it's like to work with clients as a small studio, managing a creative team, how to avoid letting clients take over projects and your life, as well as how to keep some work-life balance while maintaining a great deliverable and giving clients what they frankly are paying for. It's a really great episode for anyone that's in the industry or is thinking about going freelance or taking on some of their own business. I think it's also just great from a work-life balance perspective, and we talk about getting refreshed and finding inspiration in nature and the world outside of your screen. I think it's a fantastic episode, and I can't wait for you to listen to it. So, obviously, we both kind of have a background as being, my guess is if I recall, we taken some of the same steps, right? Where we were both working for other people for a while and then decided to launch our own studios. And we kind of are doing this business of one model, which
Correct.
is, it's just you, it's just me, but we bring on people as need, right? So it's kind of a very fluid company is what I would call it. What was the motivating factor for you to launch on your own, and what were some of your biggest fears when you were thinking about launching?
So yeah, for a while I worked in-house at a big snowboard company at Burton Snowboards. And I had been moonlighting and freelancing on the side in like nights and weekends for a while. And, just kind of getting plugged into that pipeline through the different Slack channels and, just meeting people online and at conferences like NAB and Half Res and stuff. And I ended up leaving Burton to go to another place that was in Boston. It was an agency in Boston that had recruited me away to do like 3D animation. And a buddy of mine worked there and kind of recruited me away. And so at the time I left Burton, we were living here in Vermont. And my wife was in grad school, so we couldn't just move. She had to finish up. There was a couple, maybe 3 months left of her program. And so the new employer was like super chill. And they're like, yeah, why don't you work remote until then and then move down? So I'm really into like 3D animation, specifically product visualization for companies, typically in the outdoor industry or like outdoor lifestyle brands. And so that's kind of what I wanted to pursue. And they wanted to pursue that as well. But what ended up happening was they were just so busy. And I saw the roadmap of things, of projects lining up. And it was a lot of just 2D animation, explainer type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it just wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. And I felt that before I were to uproot my family and move states and all that, like I only wanted to do that if I was completely in love with the job, and I just wasn't there. Great people and all that, and the work was fine. It just wasn't what I wanted to do. So essentially just took a deep breath and went full-time freelance and just started to do my own thing in a full-time capacity. And really at the time I had a son who was 2. And so like failure wasn't really an option, and it was terrifying, but it also was very motivating,
So what did that handoff look like? Because, for me, I think everyone's a little different, how much runway they want to have, how much, should I have a ton of savings? Can I just jump out the window and just clients just come? For me, I wanted to make sure I had one long-term, about 6-month contract set up, that I knew, okay, if I leave the company right now, I can have work for the next 6 months. And then from there, that kind of gives me a good springboard to jump off of and work on finding new clients while that was happening. But I know other people that just fall straight into freelance and, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. What was your handoff kind of that?
Yeah, so totally. My ultimate goal was to have, if and when I went full-time freelance, I wanted to have at least 3 months of runway, right? So if nothing comes in for 3 months, I'm good. You know, the family's good. And just by coincidence, we had been saving money to make this move. And then when I decided it wasn't going to work, all of a sudden I had this money that we had been saving. So essentially that ended up being the runway. But, you know, I feel very blessed and just very fortunate that never even had to dip into that. As soon as I posted on, you know, Instagram and even like LinkedIn, I grabbed a few clients right off the bat. It is the one benefit of working kind of in the outdoor industry is that it's somewhat small. It's very connected. So maybe someone who you had a relationship with at this company is now over at this company and they need animation services. And so it, you know, the networking thing really, you know, essentially allowed me to grab clients right off the bat.
Yeah. So essentially you were networking previously without really intentionally networking, right? Just the places you've been,
you
the
know,
friends you've made.
To be honest, and like I kind of came to this realization that like if you ever have like aspirations to be a business owner or like any sort of entrepreneur, whatnot, like looking back all through, you know, my adult life, but then through college and high school, I mean, everything's networking, right? Quote unquote networking. And these people that you might not have talked to in 15 years might just hit you up on LinkedIn or something because they remember that you're a solid person and like you're, you know, you're running your own business, and they'll probably take a chance on you because you have somewhat of a loose connection already just from, you know, growing up. So looking back on it, I just think of like, there's people that I've done gigs for and projects for that I knew from high school, from college, from like just randoms, you know, and it really resonated with me that like essentially everything leading up until now has been me building this kind of network unknowingly. Right.
Yeah.
And honestly, I felt that if I didn't get any jobs, I could like projects coming in, I could probably reach out to someone at a company and probably try to get a full-time job somewhere. Right. Like that was always my backup plan was that if for some reason the freelance thing and doing my own thing didn't work, like I'm pretty sure I have a skill set that is needed at some capacity at some company, you know, and if I have to reach into that, I will, but thank goodness I haven't. And yeah, still going strong few years later.
That's a couple of things I always try to tell students if I talk to them or young people. Just be reliable. When I think of my Rolodex in my head, when I'm going through thinking about, well, who do I want to call for this? I have a job that I can't take or that's not right for my skill set. Who do I know that I know if I give this out to, they're going to look good for me? I'm not going to have to worry about them, you know, defaming me in some sense by failing this project, by me recommending them and them not being reliable. So you having that notoriety as someone that's reliable is super important. The other thing that you mentioned is just like you have this you know skill set that's useful almost anywhere, and so building one skill to the point of being really really useful, I think is also another really core step that it's easy to overlook in sort of our world of, you know, everything's accessible all the time and you want to learn everything. And I definitely fall under this category of someone that likes to learn everything. But, you know, having something that you can say, well, but I am actually pretty good. It doesn't have to be the best, but I'm pretty good in this one specific thing. For the people that kind of doubt a lot of the niching down, right? You seem to have a very, very specific niche, right? It's like, 3D visualization for action sports, right? I would say, is that about correct?
Yeah, it's more of the general outdoor industry, if you will, but yes, very action sport centric, you know, skiing, snowboarding, skateboarding, surfing, kind of that.
Yeah. So yeah, 3D visualization for outdoor sports, I guess, products, right? And typically, you know, that sounds really, really specific. And for a lot of people, it's going to sound like surely there's not enough projects in that one little thing.
Right.
But in some ways, you're kind of the guy or one of the guys to go to for this stuff. You know, outside of your contacts, how has that been? Like that, was that risky for you, or were you confident that choosing something this small? Because you've been pretty, from what I see anyway, you've been pretty targeted, right? It's not like
Mhm.
you were like, oh, I just was this generalist and then this happened to be where I fell. It feels
Mhm.
like you went out in an effort to get these clients. Is that true?
Yeah, well, yes and no. I mean, part of it is that, this is, I'm essentially marrying two industries that I know. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I know snowboarding really well. I know skateboarding really well. I know surfing really, like, outdoor stuff very well. Like, if you have a new helmet per se, we can talk about the new features and what you want to do. You don't have to explain to me what, this certain technology in the helmet is, because I'm familiar with that. Like,
Right.
if we're not having this conversation about the product or the project, I've probably seen it online because it's a mountain bike helmet that I'm interested in or something,
Right. Or
So
it's been fed to you in your RSS feed of some sort
exactly,
on
exactly.
upcoming
So like
news.
taking kind of the animation expertise and then the outdoor expertise and putting them together uh, really allows me to kind of speak to, say, both sides of a project too. Like, I can talk with artists all about it, and I can talk with the product developers all about their
Mm.
product too. So yeah, in terms of niching down, like, I was scared shitless. Sorry, I hope I can swear.
No, that's fine.
But yeah, I was scared niching down because I just wasn't sure. I was like, and I've heard about positioning. I've seen and heard a lot of people talk about it on podcasts and YouTube videos and all that. And yeah, I ended up taking a course with the Future
Right.
with Chris and Matthew and Ben at the time, and they had a whole thing about positioning. And one exercise they had us do was to essentially create a list, figure out your niche, and then create a list of 100 companies. And if you can create a list of 100 companies that fits in that niche that you could do a project for, then that's a pretty good sign that even though you think that niche is very small, it's actually quite big. So
Mm-hmm.
I was able to make that list really fast. And then I remember, I think it was Matthew was like, well, think about this. If you do one project for them, right, or for one of these companies, that's 100 projects. That's probably, you know, 5 to 10 years of work. Like, you're
Right.
probably so just kind of shifting that mindset and like, and looking at it in a different way. It blew my mind, and it made me more confident in niching down. And then really what the biggest surprise of all that was, once I found that positioning and once I committed to it, all of a sudden I started getting hit up more, because in essence, now I've kind of positioned myself as the expert
Mm-hmm.
in this field. Because who, like you had mentioned earlier, um 3D product visualization for the outdoor like, if you're in, if you're
Mm-hmm.
a marketing guy or girl in that area and you're looking for it, like product visualization, well, there's not much that pops up, right?
Right.
So anyhow, like, it just, positions you as the expert because you are so niched. I
Mm-hmm.
guess I don't know if that makes sense. I hope it does, but it was a very interesting thing that happened just as like a side thing. I didn't even realize, like, by doing that, it positioned me as an expert.
Right.
So I was
So
like,
you were trying to find clients and you're thinking, well, here's what I'm interested in, and here's 100 that I could potentially reach
mm-hmm,
out to. And then by essentially just making that your audience, being, one of the few people that are, regularly doing this work, and especially this work, it puts you in this position in the marketplace as being, that sort of person, right? Like, well, you're
right.
obviously this guy. I feel that way about, a lot of people. You see this with any number of artists or creatives where there's other people doing things, but because they're not really specialized, they're not looked as that guy. I think this is Ash was this way. Ash Thorpe. He was the UI UX guy like forever. Like, if you wanted UI UX stuff in movies, it was like you're reaching out to this guy because that's like his whole reel was just that, and people were like, well, that's the guy.
Totally.
Did your mindset change project wise when you were leaving a company? What I found was when I worked for other companies, projects are often um it was more day-to-day stuff, smaller kind of, hey, end of the week we could really use this sort of deals. And then when I went out on my own, what I've learned is, um, the more valuable something is to a client, the more time they're willing to put into it, essentially. And the projects that I find are usually the ones that pay well, that go better, are ones where we have, like, probably 2 to 4 months, like, runway of production time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, was that mindset a change for you? Because that was something I had to get used to when I first started working with clients myself, and I was the one managing the time. I would tell them, like, oh yeah, I think we can get this done in like 2 weeks or a month. And then I'd realize, oh, I'm running on this production calendar where I was the guy at the bottom of the food chain. And so yeah, for me it was 2 weeks, but they've been planning this for, a month or 2 months or 3 months, and they're just bringing me at the end to execute. But now that I'm the guy that's planning and executing, I need to be thinking on more of a quarterly or, bi-monthly basis. And you
Right.
mentioned that 100 projects would last you a few years. And I think for some starting creative artists or some starting freelancers, they're like, 100 projects, that's like maybe a year's worth of work. Like I do, a project a week.
Mhm.
And so hearing that, it sounds like what you're saying, this is bigger, and it's more large, chunky projects. Is that how
Yeah,
it's happened?
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, sure, you could do 100 projects in 6 months and they'll all be like, one quick day, whatever,
Mhm.
or a little logo animation or whatnot. But yeah, what I'm after, and honestly, this is the reason why I started my studio. I'm after just bigger projects, larger
Mhm.
projects that, would be kind of flagships of the marketing campaign, doing a creative that would be for video, for social, for print, for web, trying to touch all these different places for content. And so, like, I have a minimum level of engagement that I have with clients, and that helps weed out, just kind of the one-off, hey, we just need this little thing done, which is great. And sometimes I'll do that for homies or, people that hit me up.
Mhm.
But for the most part, I'm taking on larger projects that typically have a project timeline. About a production project, excuse me, the production time of the project normally for me is about 6 weeks or
Mhm.
so, and that takes into account feedback,
Right.
right? So as far as I can tell, since I've been doing this, the biggest hang up of this process is feedback with the client. So I try to buffer all that in
Mhm.
through my contracts and stuff. I try to put kind of a little bit of a box around that feedback with a time frame, especially if a client comes to me and they say their campaign's going to launch in 6 weeks, right?
Right.
And I know I'm going to need all that time to
Mhm.
create all this. So if it's kind of like a, say, rush job like that, I'll even put in the contract that you have 48 hours to give feedback. And if
Mhm.
there's none given, we'll deem that as approved
Right.
and we'll just keep moving, because otherwise you don't want to be treading water. And then all of a sudden 6 weeks turns into 2. And
Right.
you're like, whoa, how do like, this is like not possible. And then you have to ramp up and you're hiring other people. And all of a sudden the project just becomes kind of chaotic.
Yeah, I have two separate
Um,
projects right now, literally, that I'm trying to avoid that on.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
yeah. So
yeah.
one thing that I've realized too, is not only, I should say, I've realized, but I think a big difference between being like a hired gun freelancer working day rate and someone who's kind of running their own studio, agency, whatever, project based stuff, is just all that client relationship.
Mhm.
And especially in my industry, in my world, people don't really know what 3D animation is. So it's, for me, it's a lot of education to the client on how this production process happens. You know, check out this render. It's wireframe. It's low res. Like, don't worry, it's not going to look like that.
Yeah.
Because you'll always get that email of, oh my gosh, I can't even see what is happening
Mhm.
here. So it's managing expectations and also just spending time to educate the client. And I think if you educate the client and you're willing to kind of go above and beyond with them in that regard, I think you're just earning a ton of trust from them. And with me, when I'm building that trust, I'm also hoping to build long-term partnerships with these people and or brands. Because like I said earlier, those people can move from brand to brand, to company, so I think it all comes back down to just being a solid, being nice, right? Like, it's crazy how much that can help you in life. It's just being a kind person. Like, everyone should just be kind. But yeah, kind and just being reliable, delivering on time, attending the meetings on time, responding, it's all those little soft skills that add up to being a good business owner, that then if you're running the business good, then it should allow you a little bit more time either on the box or creating treatments or whatnot, and kind of doing the creative that you like.
Yeah, let's get a little spicy here. What do you think about, I push back really hard on artists because there's very much so this meme of like, oh, the client sucks, and oh, they always want feedback, and
Right.
and I really have no patience for that. I'm like, okay, why is this deadline this way? Why didn't you communicate to them that you needed more time for this? Why, like, anything that you complain about, I usually just throw right back on the artist. And it's like, and then let's just say it is a nightmare client. It's like, well, then why didn't you filter them out? Right. Like, so you're complaining about all these people and you're complaining about your clients. And it's like, it sounds like there's a common denominator, and that's you.
Right.
And so if you're finding yourself constantly in these projects that are running over time and over budget, and the clients are miserable to work with, it's like, maybe you need to work on something, and I don't think everything can be fixed with a contract. And I'm a big fan of contracts. I take time to write mine. My dad's a lawyer, so that's been like drilled into me. But at the same time, I realize that the contract, and I think this is Blair Enns that says this, is just our verbal conversation written down. Like, so if I haven't spoken verbally to you, but it's in my contract that, oh, you get one revision, and if you go over it and then suddenly I hit you with like something at the end, you're like, wait, we never agreed to this. It's like, that needs to be spoken up front. So do you see this meme of artists that are kind of just these that complain a lot about the clients, and then do you feel like me, where you are like, that's your problem, or do you have a little more empathy maybe for the artists that are running around complaining?
I see it both ways for sure, but when it comes down to it, even if you are a solo freelancer and you're not running your own studio or whatever, like, you're still a business, right? So you're in a client service business essentially. So yes, you need to temper the expectations of the client, and you have to, have pretty strict guidelines of how you run a project, and this is how I do it and all that. But at the end of the day too, they're paying you to deliver something that you need to deliver on. And if it's not good, whether they've blown through their revisions or not, like, you still have to deliver it. So like, I mean, there's been times where, okay, the client has some feedback that they want to keep pushing this look a little bit further. They thought it would look a little bit different, now seeing it in motion, it's not really clicking with them. And to me, they've already blown through their revisions. I could go back to them and say, okay, it's going to cost you X amount to redo this and push it further, yada, yada. But at the same time, if you're not delivering the quality that they thought they were supposed to get, and are kind of disappointed or just bummed out that it didn't come out as good, I mean, that's on you, right? And so like, you still need to deliver, even if it's now costing you money. I mean, it's reputation, right? You want to work with this brand again, I hope, or this client again. So sometimes you just have to go above and beyond, and the only one to blame of why maybe it's not up to par is you, because you're the only one. It falls on your shoulders. There's no one else to point fingers at.
Right. So let's make this a little more clear. I think something that might be valuable here is to give people a line. So there's obviously a line between clients that are abusive, right, and that are running you ragged, and then, like you said, people that generally you like working with and they like working with you, but the communication is not happening the way it should. What
Hmm.
what would be one of those lines for you that shows a client? Because I fired plenty of clients,
Hmm.
and that's also part of this. So I don't want to sound like, you know, there's never a time where you should work every weekend and you should be putting your. That's not what we're saying. So
Hmm.
what might be valuable is to have a line that people can look at and go, okay, well that's their line. Maybe I can bake my line off of that. What's your line for, this is my responsibility to deliver something good to somebody that I
Hmm.
have a relationship with. And even if it's going to take a little bit longer, I'm going to treat them
Hmm.
like family, where I'm not going to like look at my clock at the end of lunch and be like, "Hey mom, it's been an hour 15. I'm going to have to start charging you overtime." Like we don't do that with people.
Right. Right.
So I don't do that with clients if it's, just a little bit over or whatever. It's like, you know what? That's fine. And I also budget for that, right? There's plenty of times where I come in under and I'm like, "Oh, cool. This was a little bit faster than I wanted. You're
Yep.
still paying me the same amount." There's that give and
Yep.
take. What's a clear line for you when someone's gone past that and into, okay, you're getting a little bit abusive now, and I'm gonna have
Hmm.
to put up some barriers?
That's a great question. And if you have a line, please let me know. No, it honestly, it's very hard. It's hard for me to really like draw that line in the sand and be like, nope, we're done. Like
Mm-hmm.
we have to keep like for us to keep going, there's got to be more money thrown at it or the budget or give me
Mm-hmm.
more time or whatever it is. I mean, it's honestly like one of the harder parts of this for
Mm-hmm.
me is of being a business owner is really like sticking to that and
Mm-hmm.
not being a people pleaser. I'm a
Yeah.
people pleaser. I want, like, and most times that's a good thing and it's worked out well, but it is hard not to kind of get taken advantage of in a way because I mean, even for me, if I if we start going over time or too many requests or over revisions, I still somewhat feel indebted to the client because I still want to make sure that they're happy, that they'll come back. And it's a really hard thing for me.
Okay.
I'll be
I'll
completely honest with that.
I'll give you a couple of my lines, and I will see if you can agree or disagree. So one is, if I've done something that I know is over and above, and I've communicated this is over and above, and the either client or director or individual says, doesn't show any empathy for that. So I was on a project, a short film, years and years ago, and this is where I developed this line. And usually you do this, right? Usually it's like you have a really bad relationship, and then you like, okay, that's a red flag that I know I want to avoid. So this was
Mhm.
one of those, and I was working with the director as editor, and I worked like literally 2 days straight. I did not sleep. I was at the point where I was starting to fall asleep. Driving my car. It was bad. It was not good. Don't do this to yourself. And I was running on pure caffeine. And I told her, I was like, look, I haven't slept for 2 nights in a row. And this is going to be my third night. I really got to sleep. I really got to take a break. And they go, I don't care. This needs to get done. And I was like, okay, you're dead to me. So that
Oh
was
my
one.
God.
Like if you're willing to put like my mental health and well-being, if you're willing to sacrifice that for your goal,
Yeah.
then that's a no, that's not a thing, right? And
Mhm.
they've never, I've given away a lot of work. I've probably given away a couple $100,000 worth of work over the years. They're never been called ever. I have like a black book of people that like that you're dead to me,
Yeah.
people. So that's one. If you're putting people's well-being on the line or and showing no empathy, if I say like, hey man, I would get this done this weekend, but it's my little brother's birthday, and and they go, we really need this done. I'm gonna be like, okay, that's it. So that's one
Mhm.
line.
Mhm.
um Another line is, if we've communicated something very, very clearly early on and you're trying to go back on that, that's me. I'm going to be bringing that back up. So if
Mhm.
we usually, I find most of the pain happens because nobody likes to have these uncomfortable conversations early on. So a client comes to you and they say, hey, we have this thing, we're going to need it done in 2 weeks, blah blah blah, and you go, yeah, I think we can try to do that. And instead of saying that's going to be almost impossible or impossible, what we're going to need to do is this, this, and that. If we can do
Mhm.
this, this, and that, then we can get this done. If not, we really can't do that.
Mhm.
And then if they change it, right? So if they're changing halfway through, that's a big problem for me. So one of the times this happened, for instance, was in this January. I had a big client, and they're and what's nice for me anyway is I'm usually working with these days very, very large companies. Like we're talking a few $1 billion in revenue every year. So I don't feel bad for them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, it's this little mom and pop shop and I'm robbing them blind. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
no, you have the money. You just don't want to pay me it. So when it comes to one of these companies, they would go, what did they say? They were like, we have 4 videos and we need to get them done in a month. I'm like, okay, we can do that if we do a template. We're going to do one video. We're going to get it
Right.
100% knocked out. And then we're going to tweak things here and there, just some of the text and a couple of the icons and visuals. It's one of these 2D sort of explainer type things.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can knock those all out in 1 month. It's going to be a lot of work. I'm bringing on 2 other artists to get this done, as well as I would say, and I was trying to push them to do 1 voiceover artist, but I think they wanted to hire 4 separate voiceover artists. I'm like, okay, so that's 4 voiceover artists, which also ups my costs. That's 3 animators. All right, but if we do a template, I can just assign 2 of them. Well, one of them is making the template. The other 2 can be, filling out the details. Halfway through, it's like, you know what? I think we're going to need a lot more customization, right? As soon as they said that, I was like, okay, that's fine. It's going to be, X amount more money. And it's like, oh, okay. I thought we could get this. It's like, no, we were very clear about this, right? So that's another one. If I've been very clear and you're changing the entire scope of a project halfway through, that's another line for me. So, obviously there's certain projects where the budget's high enough, if I'm charging someone, around, let's say $50,000 or something for something. And I know my profits are, probably like $30,000.
Yeah.
If that's the case, then it's like, oh yeah, guys, look, we can make more changes. Like, we'll make more. Why not? But when, when it's a lot lower than that, when it's something like, 10K sounds like a lot of money until you realize, oh, you got to pay 3 people, and it's like, oh, that doesn't go as far.
They rates that up quick.
Yeah, that does not go as far as you thought it did.
No,
it's really easy to get behind if you're not careful, and if you're just saying, yeah, sure. So those are a couple of my lines. Would you find those to be similar lines for you? Or
yeah. Well, and let me step back on some of my words a little bit too, and actually, I'll touch on kind of the good and the bad about the networking and working with people. It's great because it gets you the leads and gets you into the door and working on projects. But then it's really hard if you're working with a friend who's in a role and like they're like, hey man, can you change this, kind of like a little side ask. It's really hard to say like, hey, can you put that in an email so we can have it like there's a very fine line I find of business and friends, right? And like keeping it cool and easy to work with and not sounding too stiff as a business person, whatever. But if I don't know them and if it's just like a straight up cold call or a first time client, I feel like I'm much more like business oriented. I have my business hat on more at that time, which probably isn't great to have it, different there. But yeah, I find it hard to charge for those little extra asks. And the one thing that has really got me perplexed sometimes, and because I'll put this in my contract that, this project comes with X number of revisions and yada, yada. Well, if you're working with an agency, well, that agency is going to have revisions, but then the client's going to have revisions. And so like, if this is round 1 of revisions, like who's giving me this feedback and where's it coming from? Because if we go through all the rounds of revision and you haven't even shown it to the client yet, then like, sorry, if there are revisions, I'm going to have to charge for that.
Right.
Because whether it's coming from the client or from the agency, I'm still back making changes. So I find that's hard. And I've actually had to kind of tweak my language a little bit in the contracts that are saying like including internal revisions.
Right.
Like, because all of a sudden those 3 revisions turn into 6. Right. Because the agency is like, well, that's not our, we still need to show it to the client. So technically that's the first revision. So even in my email communications and when I send versions, I'm very clear now of this is round 1 of X. Please gather all feedback from all the stakeholders and get it back to me by this date so we can keep on schedule and on budget. And I found that outlining in an email, just that line alone, this is round 1 of X or round 2 of X. it's just super easy to keep it on track for the most part.
Right.
Because it's easily digestible. The client knows where they stand. And even if it's an agency, they know where they stand with the feedback loop there. So yeah, just little tricks like that, I feel like allow me to try to keep the project on the rails, without it slipping off. And that honestly does help too with the projects where you are working with friends or acquaintances or whatnot. It's just super easy. Round 1 of X, and okay, now we know. So
yeah.
And then when you get to the end, this is the final round of revisions before we deliver the final, the final version. So please, anything here, this is it. And similar to what you said too, I've had clients that have come back to me and they want to change the whole scope, a week before delivery.
Right.
So I use the house analogy, right?
Yeah.
Which I'm sure a lot of people have heard, but essentially we're painting the walls and you want me to rip it all out and put, new walls up. I find that breaking stuff down like that to especially people outside of any sort of production industry would they resonate with that analogy. And okay, I understand. Like, we've had to do all the wiring, we've had to do the drywall. There's so many things on top of where we are right now. So just stuff like that, and being in communication, I think is really the way you keep things on track. And like you said, if there's extra asks, hopefully you budgeted it correctly and you've got a little extra money in that pot that you're like, you know what, no problem, I'll handle it.
Right.
And because I find that if I don't budget it properly and they're asking for a little extra, I hate having to go back and ask for money. I would rather just get it right off the front. And you can even say, this project's going to be X number of dollars, and that will include all the revisions, and there should be a little extra in there if we do need to tweak some last minute things. Right. So I think if you budget it correctly, you shouldn't really have to worry about those little asks.
Yeah. That's a lot of this stuff is like, was a stitch in time saves 9, right? Like the idea that the earlier, the faster you do something, the better. I really like that little trick of, like you were saying, this is revision X of X. This is 1 of 5. And that way people know, okay, I know where we stand. It's not aggressive. It's not after the fact where they've asked for 6 months. You go, by the way, we're on the last revision. And they're like, oh, if I knew that, I would have been using these more sparingly. I wouldn't have asked for this little change if you would have told me that would have counted as a revision. I didn't think that counted as a revision. I just wanted the color change, but it was just preference. I didn't really need it changed.
And you got to think that whoever you're working with, like, this is probably just one project that they're working on,
right.
So it's easy for them to get lost in the process. So it's important for you to communicate where you are each time. That way it's black and white. You can see it in an email. It's written, there's documentation, and you can always refer to it if you need to.
No, I completely agree. I think putting in that work up front to communicate, to make it clear, here's where we're at, here's where we were at last time, here's what's happened since then. That's really valuable. And it's something, the more people I hire, the more I appreciate that clear feedback. I think a lot of artists get afraid and they want to, and this is where it comes back on the artist again, but like they want to hide stuff and not communicate it because they're hoping that someone's going to notice. I'm going to like look the camera in the eye here and be like, look, artists, you have this thing called the whole rest of your life, right? Up until this moment to know that doesn't work. Like it kills me all the time. We're like, this time, this project's going to go perfectly. I'm going to ask for whatever they want. They're going to send me it. I'm going to knock it out on the first try, and then we're going to be done. And so I'm going to budget that way. I'm going to time my timetables that way. I'm going to do everything on the assumption that it's all going to go completely right. And it's like, when in your life has anything ever gone that way? Like not a single thing. You've never taken a girl on a date that's gone that way. You've never gone on a hike that's gone that way. You've never gone to the grocery store and had it gone that way, right? It's like something's out, something's missing. Oh, it was more expensive than you thought. You got lost along the way. Oh, they were actually allergic to shellfish. Whatever it is, it never goes that way. So you just do like a little bit of planning, a little bit of extra communication, budget yourself a little bit more time, rather than being like, well, well, I'm potentially stealing from the client if I say it's going to take 2 weeks and it takes one. No, you're planning for what inevitably always happens, which is it takes
Yeah.
2 weeks. Like that's
Right.
so,
Right.
and then if it doesn't, cool, that saves you for the next project when it does take 2 weeks. So,
Mm-hmm.
stop hoping that things are going to go exactly right. It's never happened in your life before. Why would you expect it to happen now? So
Mm-hmm.
rant over, but like it kills
Yeah.
me.
No.
It kills me all the time. Something you mentioned was working with agencies. What I've made a very, very conscious effort to cut out everyone between really the artist and the end client, but at the very
Mm-hmm.
least, me as the only in between the
Mm-hmm.
artist and the end client. Um, because what I've found is, you know, this exact headaches you're talking about, where it's like, well, wait a second, where is this revision coming from? Is this actually what they want, or is this some creative director telling
Yeah.
me something that they want because they want to show something to the client? And I have horror stories about this of doing 14 revisions and the client never seeing the first one and then sending the client the first one and that being approved and be like, okay, so we wasted 14 revisions, 2 months of time because you never sent them the first thing when I read the brief and understood it and you didn't.
Right.
So
Right.
what I've consciously done is try to always cut out anyone that's not the client.
Mm-hmm.
And if I do have a middleman, it's like we're meeting with them together. Like I'm
Mm-hmm.
not going to sit here and um, let you meet with them and speak on my behalf because you're going to misrepresent me or you're going to
Mm-hmm.
promise something that I can't deliver, and I don't
Right. Right.
trust you to do that. Um, do you enjoy meeting with the client or do you like that buffer? Because the pushback I usually hear about that from artists is I don't want to talk to the client. They scare me. I don't like talking money. I'd
Mm-hmm.
rather let someone else do that for me. And the problem is then you run into a lot of these issues. Do you enjoy being in the room with the client, or would you rather have a buffer?
Oh yeah, no, I like talking with the clients for sure. I mean, the closer you can get, the better, I think. And yeah, working with the agencies and stuff, it's hard. It creates just more people in the process, essentially. And like you said, varying opinions. There's people are hired just to give their opinion on something or just to be in meetings all day. Like that's their job. And
Mm-hmm.
so sometimes that gets a little overwhelming and you kind of get tired of that. But sometimes having that buffer is good because you don't want to have to deal with like, say the video portion is just part of this massive campaign,
Mm-hmm.
like not having to talk about the print aspects or the web, like let them do that. You just communicate of like the part of the project that I need to do. So like
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that is I find it nice to have that buffer. And even sometimes like before we started the call, I was telling you, sometimes I'll even help studios out or whatever, just on a
Mm-hmm.
day rate to fill some gaps in my schedule. And sometimes that's nice too, because it's great just to be the artist and you don't even have to deal with the client. It's just like, all right, cool. You need me to model this. I need to light and animate that. Like it's kind of nice just to be on cruise control, especially if most of my work is direct to client and balancing client expectations and artists all over the globe. And so that stuff's stressful. I
Mm-hmm.
enjoy it, but sometimes it's nice to like, kind of sit back and just be an artist for a little bit.
Yeah, I got to do that recently with a volunteer project. I have a camp in Spain that I regularly work with.
Oh, sweet.
And and I know the guy that runs it, and I've known him since I was a little kid. And they do like a little storytelling session, and they usually have a video, like a opening title for each one. So there's like the
Okay.
camp name, which is Joe Ventura, and then each day. So it's like dia one, and there's a theme. And so sometimes it's Western theme, sometimes it's space theme, whatever it is.
Oh,
So
cool.
yeah, I just got to do those, and it was super fun just being an artist for like 2 days and just making titles and being like, oh, I'm gonna, they're not like HBO right level, but they're like
Right.
HBO 8 years ago.
Right.
It's like,
Well,
you know,
and it's funny too, like talking about this aspect of it, because the reason why, say, a business owner or someone running a studio is working with a $50,000 budget, and you're not just working day rates for a company or whatnot, is because you're also taking on that massive risk, right?
right.
Like if the project completely fails, like that's totally on you. If
Mm-hmm.
it's bonkers the best thing, well, that's totally on you too, you know, and maybe you make a bunch of money on it. Maybe you break even, maybe you lose money,
Right.
but it's just the risk and all the other like outside factors from the project that you're having to balance and manage. Whereas if I'm on a day rate, like I just said, you know, it's kind of like cruise control. It's like, all right, sweet, I can just come in and accomplish these tasks and then like done for the day, you know.
Right.
So there's something to be said too of bigger risk, bigger reward, right?
Right.
And yeah, I think there's two kind of mindsets right now in kind of this freelance world, you know, of I'm an artist or I'm a business owner, like studio owner.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've just in the animation world, specifically like 3D and stuff, I've seen a lot of people that they just work on day rate, or no, I work on project rate, and then this is how I work.
Mm-hmm.
So I see more and more people going project rate, which I think is good. I mean, overall, I think it's a good thing. It allows the artist to control costs and whatnot. And I don't know. I would be curious to hear your thoughts on that too. Like, do you think you've probably seen this big influx of artists starting, especially with COVID, like
Right.
working remote, doing your own thing, going freelance? I mean, even friends here that worked full time forever are now like freelance producer, freelance
Yeah.
editor, you know?
Yeah. It might. I'm a little controversial in this fact, I guess, but in my dream world, everyone would only ever be contract, and the reason why is it forces you to think of yourself as a little bit of a business, but
Mm-hmm.
also you maintain your freedom. I think a lot of the problems we see, and you see this with all sorts of companies, that people get married to these companies, and it's a bad relationship. And
Mm-hmm.
I would kind of rather everyone view themselves as a solo entity that can at will work somewhere or not work somewhere, and that puts a lot more pressure on the company to treat you better. And while like, oh no, I'm way more replaceable, therefore, they wouldn't be as willing to. It's like, no, they're getting a steal anytime they hire. Like, they wouldn't hire you full time if it wasn't for the fact that they're saving money by doing
Right.
that. Them making you a full time employee saves them so much more money than having you would be a contractor. And
Mm-hmm.
it locks you in. It makes them so they don't have to worry about, will you be here next week? Will you not be here next week? Versus
Mm-hmm.
if they really like your work, if you really truly are good at what you do, being a freelancer gives you command, to kind of force them to make good decisions. I did this with a company early on they are offering a full-time job. And I recommend people do this. Go to companies that are looking for full-time jobs and negotiate to be freelance and take, whatever it is to, because for me, my freedom is very, very valuable. Like, I value it above everything else. And so I took this job as a freelancer, even though they were looking for full time, and I pretty much worked there full time. But anytime they did something really stupid, I'd be like, I'm not working on that. I'm not available next week. And what
Mm-hmm.
it forced them to do is start thinking ahead and stop being, well, Alex is going to be here tomorrow, so we can say, yeah, we'll deliver it tomorrow. I'd be like, I'm not going to be there tomorrow. And
Mm-hmm.
they're like, wait, well, I thought we had you. So then they started thinking ahead.
Mm-hmm.
They had to book me for a week at a time, and they had to start thinking, okay, what do we actually want to get done? Where do we want to use this guy's time? He's valuable to us. When do we not need him and need to be smarter with our budgeting and stuff? And I liked the fact that I was that force for good,
Mm-hmm.
in this company, which was a little bit of a mess, which is also why I didn't want to commit to full-time work. I saw, like, after 2 days, I was like, your workflow's atrocious. If you guys like can fix this and make this all better, perhaps I'll consider committing, at a higher, salary or something. But
Mm-hmm.
I need to keep my freedom and distance in this.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very absurd to me that we treat jobs often like, okay, I'm going to see you probably more than I'm going to see my wife, right? Like, if I'm working full time somewhere,
Sure.
and I'm going to see you 5 days a week minimum, if not more, and for 8 to 10 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
Why, why would I commit to this after, like, 2 weeks or a week maybe of like trial period? Or sometimes it's like, oh, it's a 3 month. Like, we don't get married after 3 months. Like, that's not what happens, right? Like, some
Right,
people,
right.
but like, I'm not going to sit here and commit to this big thing and give you all of my time. Like, it's such a huge commitment, and we take it
Mhm.
so not seriously.
Mhm.
And I'd much rather take that seriously. I'd much rather maintain my freedom and everyone else maintain their freedom, and force companies to be smarter and to value them more highly. I also wish people would be more transparent about salary and expectations and time and all this other stuff. But yeah, that's my dream world is a world where everybody is kind of freelance. And then I think the problem with day rates, and this has become a really long answer, so I'm sorry about that, but
That's-
when it comes to day rates, um, the problem is it punishes you for being efficient, especially hourly. What I learned was I was really efficient. I put a lot of value on efficiency, and I bring my little dongle with all of my presets and all of my macros and everything, so I could knock stuff out. And so I would sit
Mhm.
down someplace, and even though I was charging for where I'm at a higher rate, I think I was charging $45 an hour a couple of years back, 4 years ago now, I think. Um, and I would be like, wait a second, I was able to do this in 2 hours. This other guy is charging slightly less. He's charging $30 an hour, but he took the whole day to do it,
Right.
or 2 days. And I'd get someone's project and I'd be like, what, why were you spending 2 days on this? And so
Yeah.
I could knock stuff out in a day often. If it was I was knocking out probably a 1 to 2 minute spot, mostly car ads at the time, a day. So I was getting a spot a day done. And there'd be another guy sitting next to me that was getting one done a week. And I
Mhm.
was like, okay, I'm getting punished here for working too efficiently. So I
Yeah.
need to charge the whole week's worth of rate all at
Right.
once. And then I'm getting paid more than or the same as this guy, but at least now I'm working half the hours. So if I'm
Yeah.
efficient, like, I shouldn't be punished for that. And so it's a backwards incentive, I think. And a lot of companies like to hire people hourly, but I tell them the
Mhm.
same thing. It's like, this is bad for the company too. Like, you're incentivizing them taking as long as possible. So one of the things my company does is when I hire somebody is we set aside part of the budget. And even if you're working hourly, if you come in under that budget, it gets released to you.
Hmm.
Meaning that whether or not you're working hourly, you're going to get paid as though it's a project rate, right? And so what that does is it incentivizes you to know, hey, if I finish this in like half the time, I get the rest of that as just bonus cash. So I don't have to worry about. So if you're someone that likes to track their hours just for your own peace of
Mhm.
mind, I know if you use up that budget, it's used up. But that means
Right.
that cool, you weren't working as it went over, or we gave you too many revisions, or whatever it is. Um, that's fine. You used up that budget. But if it's there, then it's yours. And so um, that's something that I've been trying to implement more and more, because it keeps people thinking about, oh, what could I get? What could I do if I finish this Thursday, I have all Friday off, and I get this like little chunk of change I wasn't expecting. That puts them in this mindset of like, well, now this weekend I could take like a nice little mini vacation or something.
So essentially, so you like hire your contractors at on like pretty much a project rate. So you're like,
Right. So what I'll do is I'll have a budget set aside to usually 50% of whatever the project is to make said project.
yeah,
Um, if they come out underneath that, it gets split amongst them, right? So
yeah.
it's not like you get all of it. If it's like 2 or 3 people working on it, and they know, hey, if we can find a way to help each other out to get this done faster, then this gets released to us, right? So it's just a nice little incentive to,
Hmm.
it's not exactly like they're working at a project rate, but it's like that. And if they work a project rate, then it's just a project rate, right? Then they don't
Right.
necessarily get the bonus unless I ask more of them, and that's something I try to encourage companies to do, because there's two sides of this, right? There's like the employee side and then the company side, and
Hmm.
then
Hmm.
I play both as someone that gets hired by companies and then hires other people. And so when it comes to my practices, it's like, okay, if I ask you to work the weekend, that's going to be a lot, and I know what that's costing you. And I say, usually what I'll do is the conversation looks like this. It's like, hey, I'm really hoping to have something Monday. I know it's Thursday afternoon. Um, if you have to work the weekend, how do you feel about that? And they'll be
Hmm.
like, I feel not super great about that. I kind of was hoping to not work this weekend. I go, okay, if you have to work this weekend and you get a $500 bonus, how do you feel now?
Hmm.
And then they go, I feel great. It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
but it's just valuing their time. It's sitting here being
Hmm.
like, I'm going to ask this of you, but I understand what I'm asking. And I think that's where we start to feel really bad. We really do work on a reciprocity sort of scale. And then when you start asking somebody of something that they didn't commit to, or they didn't think they committed to, you need to acknowledge that, and you need to reward people as often as possible. And that's again where on my end, I need to be budgeting that in the front. Like in the front, I need to be budgeting in that this is what I'm going to be asking people to do. There's a potential that I need someone to work a weekend, which means I need that extra bonus cash to be able to hand somebody. You know, if someone just does a fantastic job, I'll also just throw them extra cash at the end of like, I'm going to give you a tip, which is something that's like baffling for businesses. They don't think of tipping. I don't understand this idea. Like we do this with waiters and waitresses, and there's a whole debate about whether or not we should. But the fact is, if someone does more over and above, if someone I know like just killed it, and I know I have some extra cash lying around, to me, that's an investment. And it's really worth it to give that person an extra couple, you know, $100 or $1,000 at the end of a project, because the next project, they know that that's what they do. Like they're going to kill it again. They're going to keep killing it, knowing that that's not going to be go unrecognized. It's not going to go unrewarded.
Like you said, being on both sides, you know, things that are pain points for artists and then for companies, but stuff that will also stoke them out. Like one thing, when I work with contractors, as soon as I get the invoice, I pay it. Like whether or not I even have the money from the client yet, like it doesn't matter. Like that's not they shouldn't care about that. Like, you know, they're essentially being hired by my business. Like as a business, I should have the money to pay them. And I can't stand when, you know, certain things aren't paid by companies or studios or whatnot because they haven't been paid by the client. It's like, okay, well, I don't care about that.
Right. They're not hiring me.
I gave you my service.
Right.
You know, and so again, it's just going back to just being nice and kind and like treating people how you would want to be treated. So as soon as I get an invoice, boom, paid, you know, and I find that with everyone I work with, they're super stoked because they know like I'll pay right away, you know, on time and all that. And I just find if you take care of the artist or like you give them a little bonus or a tip or whatnot, of course they're going to want to like keep working with you. And especially if you're like relatively easy to work with and fun to work with and you're doing cool projects. Like, I mean, as an artist, to me, that sounds like the best case scenario, working on cool projects with someone who pays you immediately. And like, also I try to, you know, when I hire people too, like we're part of a team. Yes, I might be directing the spot or whatnot, but like, give me input. Like we're, you know, I can't do it all myself. The reason I'm hiring people to get, you know, new minds in or people who can achieve technical stuff that I can't. Like, I want to know, let's talk about it. So like, not only giving them and treating them well, but giving them some creative responsibility. And like, I've been really trying throughout the last year or two to really budget in and work in time to the schedule for like a week or maybe even 2 of just R&D. Yeah. Just R&D. Like, let's just play around in Houdini for some stuff. We know we're going to have to do this sim. Like, let's figure out some cool looks, you know, and just allowing the artist to kind of play a little bit. And then you kind of have those happy accidents, you know? So not to go too far off topic, but I was an art major in college and, you know, painting and all, and I find that you have to have those moments of kind of inspiration and just the creativity of just creating with really no end goal, like, you know, and allowing those happy accidents to happen. Because if you're just going right in, trying to execute a vision, you're in production, you're not creating time to allow those moments to happen. And sometimes it comes across in those projects because those projects seem very stale, you know, like, and sometimes that's just the nature of the beast, right? You just need to bang out this video and it's not going to, you know, win an Oscar, you know, whatever awards they do now. But like, I don't know. And I also find as the artists that I work with, that's like their favorite part of the job, you know? So, I think if you can create that room for the artist to play and have a sense of creativity in that they have more at stake in this project than just being a hired gun. I think just creating that rapport with other artists, you slowly begin to grow this network of really trusted, well-rounded artists that, like, you know, essentially you can trust their vision. You can give them a task. You'll know they'll execute it really well and maybe bring something new to the table. But I don't know. I found that now after doing this for so long, I've got a core group of probably 10 freelancers that like I can hit up and feel 100% that they will be able to hop right in, accomplish these tasks, add a little bit of their vibe to it, and like on to the next. But yeah, I think it's just part of like the whole being a nice person to really get back to it, you know?
Yeah, no. And I think it's that ability to have done the thing. I think that's one of the problems with a lot of like, I see this evolution of companies, and it's funny that you mentioned what you're doing because I do the same thing now. It's like, yeah, we budget some time for R&D just to mess it around, just to figure out what's going on, have that fun process. I give them as much control as possible, to be honest. Like, I have this like rules for feedback that I have, which is I'm only ever going to give you, say, change something if it's an objective change that I know is going to matter. If it's a color that I don't, if it's a preference of mine, I let your preference overrule my preference. I'm not going to sit here, maybe if it's something really, really personal that I want done a special way, there's exceptions obviously to every rule, but my general rule is, especially if I'm doing something for an end client and it's like my preference versus your preference, I just leave it. And then if the client says something, I make the same rules for my clients too. I'm like, I use this phrase all the time where they go, because usually they'll say something like, well, how would it look if we did this? And I go, it would look different, but not better. And so, I'm like, do we want to spend money on different or do we want to spend money on better? And it's like, oh yeah, we should probably spend money on better. I'm like, right. So, when it comes to things that are just like, oh, that lamp is a little too, I thought it would be more blue. It's like, okay, is that going to make a client buy this, thing or not? Is that going to make a customer like, is that the difference between them clicking on it or not? And they're like, no. I'm like, what is? Like, what's the thing that you should actually be telling me to do and not art directing my artist? So
yeah,
that's one thing I do. But yeah, and I think everything you're saying reminded me very much so of, there's a quote from Steve Jobs, which is like, we don't hire smart people to tell them what to do. We hire smart people to tell us what to do. And that's how I feel too, is when I'm hiring an expert, when I'm hiring someone that, I think really knows their stuff, a Houdini artist or, someone that's a texturing or a lighting professional, it's like, I'm going to hire them and ask them, hey, is this possible? And what could we do to make this better or do this? How's this going to work? And having that time, what's kind of that safe space where they can tell where they can say like, oh, I tried it and it doesn't work the way I thought it would, is really, really valuable. And I've been trying to do that a lot with my team. And it's been really good because we've been working some real technical stuff and it's been nice trying to solve these technical problems and finding creative solutions to it, and having that time to do that really, I think is really, really valuable. Yeah, there's a lot more I could get into, but I think I want to start wrapping it up because we could probably talk for like 3 hours. But one of the things I did want to touch on before we end is, you run this camp, right, for motion designers, and it seems like a really cool getaway space. And I just kind of wanted to give you an opportunity to, I mean, it's sold out, but to talk about it and to maybe plug it a little bit. But what inspired you to do that? And then, we'll start with one question. What was like the inspiration for that?
Yeah, nice. So yeah, you're referring to Camp Mograph, which is the event that I started with a few other animators. 3 years ago now. I mean, it's really hard because the pandemic threw everything off. Right. So I think about year one, but that was actually 2 years. Yeah. Anyway, but how the whole thing kind of came about was, so I live in Vermont. My wife is from Maine. It's about a 4-hour drive from us. And we go out there quite a bit just to see her family and whatnot. And a few years ago, I was driving back and everyone in the car was sleeping. So I was off daydreaming as I was driving and think about stuff. And we were going through this one road that kind of goes through the White Mountains of New Hampshire, by Mount Washington there, and beautiful part of the country. Like, you're up in the woods going through rolling mountains and hills, and there's lakes and, just nature all around you. So I'm looking at this one lake and it looks like there's a couple like cabins around it. I'm like, this might be fun to grab a couple, animators or motion designers and like, let's rent like an Airbnb for the weekend and we'll go fishing and canoeing and, drink some beer, just kind of hang out, talk shop. So, I thought that was a good idea. And I, about a week later, I went to Half Res in Chicago. It's the Cinema 4D group in Chicago runs that.
Right.
And it's a great conference. And I went and stayed in an Airbnb with a few animators and Dave from Mograph.com. And this other guy, Liam, was there, Liam Clisham. And there was a bunch of people kind of around the dinner table at this Airbnb, and we started talking about it. And like Ryan Summers was there because at the time he was in Chicago. And so I kind of threw it out there and everyone was like, oh my God, that's amazing. We should do that. Yeah, let's do it. And then as the night progressed, we decided, well, maybe we should try to make this an event. Like, do you think people would buy tickets? And, so long story short, we decided to kick it off right then and there. And I found a camp here in Vermont that would be able to host us. It's a YMCA camp. So they're used to hosting like large groups throughout the summer that, it's an overnight camp for kids. And the main reason was just to like get all these people that live behind a computer and behind a screen all day to get out in nature. Like kind of the mantra of the weekend is kind of disconnect to connect. So we say, leave your phones, make sure all your work's kind of wrapped up before you get there. So you don't have to be trying to get on for something, we really encourage everyone just to disconnect and just kind of recharge yourself. And yeah, so we did it. We had a bunch of great presenters. We had like Barton Damer from Already Been Chewed, Aaron Sorofsky from
I saw the t-shirt there, the ABC.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, represented.
Yeah, Barton, shout out there.
Yeah.
And then Ryan Summers also was a fireside chat, which essentially is our keynote speakers. And those were great. And then we had some awesome workshops where it's really kind of back to basics. Like we had sculpting with clay, we had color theory, we had design theory. And the goal was to kind of make it real campy, like summer camp. But you're essentially learning a bit that you could then bring back to your work. So like, for instance, color theory was run by Greg Gunn, and he gave maybe a 20-minute presentation on theory and all that. And then we just started coloring and doing like color blending with oil pastels and just roundtable discussions as everyone was drawing and coloring. And it just felt like a great recharge. And everyone after camp, everyone like resonated with it so much that, there was a lot of talk on Twitter about it and like just on all the different, Slack channels, and there was a good buzz about it. And so anyway, of course we were like, well, we got to do year 2. So we did year 2 and then the pandemic hit and we had to cancel it and push it to this year. So that's what we did. And I think with the pent up demand of wanting to hang out with people, camp sold out this year in under a minute. So we thought something was going wrong. We were like, we had no idea that it would sell out that quick, but we're very happy it did and happy that it resonated with people and that we can do it again this year and bring all these artists together. And this year we're doing it in Portland, Oregon, just outside in a town called Gresham at another YMCA camp, and got a great lineup of workshop people and then also presenters to do the fireside chat as well. So it's a great excuse for us to do an event that we would want to go to and bring in artists that we would like to talk with and get to know and hear their story or whatever it is. And so selfishly, it's kind of an event that we wanted to see happen. So how people do personal projects? Well, this is essentially my personal project.
Yeah.
Like we don't make any money on it. Thanks to all the sponsors that we bring on board, we're able to offset the cost and make tickets very affordable. So it's like $700 for a 3-day weekend. That includes lodging, all your food, all the workshops and fireside chats. Then it has adult beverages at night. Like, so we try to make it affordable because, you know, as people who've come from like the freelance world and whatnot, like I don't have a training budget, if you will. And,
Yeah.
you know, going to NAB or any of these other conferences, you're spending, you know, probably $1,500 easy.
Right.
And so anyway, it was just something to kind of give back to the community as well. There's plenty of artists that do, you know, podcasts and YouTube tutorials and, you know, all giveaway stuff on Gumroad and all that. That's just not my cup of tea. I would rather do something like this to kind of give back and build community, make, you know, friends, and also network business wise, and, you know, make those connections with other artists too, to hopefully work together. Because you'd be surprised, after like eating dinner with someone who's also an animator and talking shop, like you pretty much pass the test. Then you're like, all right, cool. Yeah. I mean, I would have another meal with you. So I would hire you.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah, that's all really great. One of the things I think that's really cool is you mentioned that's kind of your version of a, you know, your, I don't know if charity is not the right word, but you know, your passion project. And I think that's really cool because I think people get caught up in what their thing has to be. And again, like the meta of this is trying to get artists to think outside the box, like think a little bit differently about, you know, what it is you can do to make money, what it is that you can do to work someplace, what it means to be, you know, a kind of a creative person that's also making money off their creativity. You know, I've talked to a couple of people that are big in the NFT space, and I'm hoping to talk to them again. And that's one thing, but I really love this idea of, you know, it doesn't even have to be at the box. Like you can do something that's in this space that's creative, that's interesting, but that's a camp, or that's, you know, some other sort of get together, or that's something that, you know, I think you mentioned also you used to have or maybe you still do have this Monday meeting kind of breakdown where it's like, we're just going to share what's going on with our lives, some mental health stuff, some, you know, struggles or some successes. And, you know, you can create a number of different spaces that, you know, that don't have to look all like the same thing everyone else is doing.
Totally.
And I think how you come up with that is in kind of the theme somewhat of today is like combine two things, like combine something over here. Oh, snowboarding and passion for the outdoors. And I'm going to combine that with, you know, motion graphics. And that's what my company's going to look like. And I'm going to combine passion for the outdoors and education. And that looks like a camp, you know, and so you can kind of keep combining these separate things. And I think it's one of the ways that it's most clear to you and the more fulfilling because it's already something you're passionate about. And it's something I really want to encourage people to think about doing is what's something that you have that you're really passionate about, and what's a space that you're in or a business that you are enjoying or want to enjoy or want to be a part of, and like try to combine those two things, see what happens, you know. That's where kind of this you know, everything's a remix, you know, idea, but like it's true, like mix it together, see what happens, you know.
Totally.
And I think it's really, really cool to see that being a success. I do hope one day you do make money on it. I don't think there's anything wrong with, with making some money on something that people find
That
so
would be the
valuable.
goal. Yeah.
And that lets you, you know, continue to do it in the future. It takes a lot of the pressure off of it if you know, okay, there's a little bit extra there, right? It's like we've been talking about. But I think it's really great. I hope that I can make one of them at some point, and I have to be there within the first minute. Like minute one, like bye. But
I mean, honestly, we feel so fortunate that the event had been successful with the tickets and all that, and we're just really excited to get together with people, and I think a lot of people are excited. Just, and what a better first event really coming out of this pandemic than a camp that essentially everything's outside, you know. So it is kind of, I mean, we're watching stuff very closely because safety is of the utmost importance to us, but you know, I'd be way more terrified if this thing happened in a conference room. So
and then we know a lot more than we used to, and you know, outdoor spaces that are, and you're not having, you know, 2,000 people, you know, it's
right.
You're gonna be, I'm not too worried about it.
Well, and I'll follow that up too by saying the one thing about camp, and we've consciously made this call, was that it will never be bigger than 125 people. We want to keep it small because keeping it small keeps it intimate. you get to make connections with people. Like I said, you get to eat dinner with people, you know, like if all of a sudden there's 500 people, it just doesn't become as personal, you know,
Yeah.
and as intimate. And really you're spending 3 days with these people, and you want, you know, I want people to walk away like with new friends. And it just becomes way harder for us to make that happen if it gets any bigger, you know? So if anything, we would consider doing another like 2 a year or something.
Right.
But yeah, our main goal is to keep it small and keep it fun. I mean, it's very relaxed. It's kind of, I like to call it a retreat rather than like a conference, because it's a way for everyone to decompress, and then you get to nerd out with people too, you know.
No, I'm really happy to hear that, because it's something I keep trying to put into the world. There's a few things I want to put into the world, and if they get picked up, I can die happy. But one of them is, you know, smaller is better. Like, I really do think we need to learn to not be cancerous all the time. Like, let's put some caps on ourselves of things that we know is, we found the optimal point, that's sustainability, right? For me, it's like, if you can create something sustainable, it's better than growing infinitely, because infinite growth is a myth. It's impossible. Right. You're going to collapse. So instead, find the like most optimal point and then run it for as long as possible. And what you do is you can outpace these large flashes, you know, in the pan, and run for like, let's say 50 to 100 years, but at 100 people. That event, you know, I don't know the math off the top of my head, but that's you know, 100,000, a few 100,000 people, right? If you can do this for that long, versus if you're doing something, you know, well, we're going to get 100,000 people in, you know, or 50,000 people 1 year, and then the next year you can't maintain those numbers, so it's not worth doing. It's like, okay, cool, you're this flash in the pan, but you in the long run lose out to the sustainable business model. Totally. So for me, it's like, yeah, I made the same decision with my company, where it's like, I never want to be running a giant studio that has multiple locations in various countries. Like, that's fine if you run that, but for me, the sustainable size is where I can know everybody. I know everybody's names. I know all their faces. You know, I have a personal relationship with all the people I'm hiring. Yes. You know, I know some business owners have mentioned this being a weird factor. They're like, yeah, someone was just hired at my company recently, and I was not part of the process at all. Like, I don't know how they found them. I don't know who they are, and I've never met them, and they're work for me now. And that's a weird thought, right? It's weird to be like, oh, now, I don't think that there's no businesses that can be that size, right? But I think that you need to figure out what the size of business that's optimal for not just the life you want to live, but what you want to, the impact you want to have, and run that. And then, you know, if you can't, I just think that'd be, I wish more people would do that. And it's very encouraging hearing that you're going in thinking about that and going, okay, well, what's another model other than just sheer size that we can do? It's like, well, we could do 2 or 3 a year, which I think would be awesome. You know, I think it'd be cool to do a summer and a winter camp, or you know what
totally.
I mean? Or spring.
Well, and I'll tell you, it's like daunting too, because I mean, we're motion designer. I'm not an event planner, you know, so it's like,
you are now.
Talk about stepping into like a completely different world, you know? But again, it's a challenge, right? And it's learning a new process and learning how events go and learn. So whatever, it's creative. I mean, honestly, I think my favorite part of all of it, besides camp itself and being there, is creating all the swag, like little pins and patches. And like, part of the reason why we don't make money is because if we do have profit, we end up putting it back and get like nicer stuff. And like, cool, now we'll have field notes for everybody, you know, like just stuff like that, where it's just fun for us to make stuff. And I just see it as an excuse to like, cool, let's make some cool hats. Let's make some, you know, like just random stuff.
Yeah, I think that's always the, I don't want to say the downfall of creatives, but like part of it is like, whenever I get like extra budget in a project or something, like, oh, cool, now I can buy Embergen. Like, now I can like get this piece of software and mess around with it for a little while. Like, oh, cool, now there's budget to like do this or to like try to learn that. And, you know, I think it's one of those things where I think it's good, to be honest. I think that's sometimes the best investments. And I'm really trying to get people to change their point of view about this, where like, that's how I'm looking at the short film that I'm working on, is it's like, well, I could be like, well, I need to be successful. I need to make a ton of money so I can make my short film, or I can cut through all that and just make the short film. And I think the same thing, I try to tell people this with their families and stuff, where it's like, well, I need to make money so I can afford this vacation, so I can spend valuable, like quality time with my kid. I'm like, or you could just spend the quality time with your kid, right? Like you can make a little bit less and spend more time with your kid, or you can try to make so much more to get to this end result that's like I don't know. It's hard to get out of that mindset because it's much harder to measure time with my kid versus dollars. Like that's, I think,
Yeah.
one of the main reasons why we're obsessed with dollars and likes and followers is just it's really easy to measure,
Yeah.
and it's really hard to
100%.
measure how much happiness did I give my kid today, or how much happiness did I feel, or how fulfilled do I, it's like I don't know. But if you can start thinking about it in that mindset, which is my whole goal, I think we'd have a lot more happy people with fewer followers, you know.
100%,
So
dude. I totally agree with that. And if I'm being honest too, that was one reason why I wanted to go full-time freelance. Is so I was just in control of my life. I didn't have to put in a PTO request to go to the dentist or to leave early on Friday because we're going to vacation or whatever, like I just hated that like micromanagement of time.
mm-hmm.
And going freelance just blew all that away, and now it's up to me to manage that time. But I've got 2 kids, they'll be home in an hour and a half, and like they'll walk through that door, and whether or not I'm on my computer trying to finish up the day, which happens more often than not, they don't care about any of that. They just want to come in and have dad time,
Right.
And honestly, could I put in another hour on this random commercial spot? Sure. But like, is it gonna move the needle for that project? Not really. Is it gonna make my kid's day by me just shutting everything down and walking out? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that is the most important thing. I mean, time is the only commodity we can't get back, right? Or like that is essentially expiring. So yeah, I mean, why, especially with kids, I mean, not to sound sappy and stuff, but like, I ended up being like the assistant T-ball coach, and like loved it. Did I think I would ever do that? Probably not. But like just being involved with the kids and talk about staying creative, dude, their imaginations are firing the whole time. He's 5.5. So he's just like, go, 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 go. So even just being around all the kids, it was away from my computer. It was giving me kind of recharging my juices, and then hanging out with the family, hanging out with my kids. And if I have to spend that extra hour, well, I'll do it when he goes to bed, because yeah, I mean, tomorrow's not guaranteed, right? So like, I love the grind. I love being a business owner and all that, but I love being able to balance my life and make room for the important things.
No, and I think that's, to me, that's where we should be measuring. And I think it's really hard to measure, but if we can take our mindset out of like, the numbers game and put it into the life, kind of game, and being like, okay, I view that stuff as an investment. It's like, I'm going to invest in my relationship with my wife, and that's going to pay off way more because she's going to be around, hopefully, way longer than this client, And so it's like, why would I spend more on this client than I'm going to spend on my own relationship when I know that, that's not going to be who I'm going to have to wake up with every day for the, the rest of the future. But it's like, but it's easy to take for granted, right? But I think that's really where I think we both hope people get to is, okay, now that you've figured out some of the money game, which you have to figure out, right? You have to figure out how to pay your bills. You got to figure out how to get clients. But then you really got to change your mindset, I think, quickly to decide, okay, well, do I want, a family, and do I want this to be a priority in my life, or do I want to kind of be one of these greats? And I think one of the dangers is we're constantly looking at these people that are awesome, that are great, and measuring ourselves against one part of them. And it's something I had to realize myself recently is like, I have a fantastic relationship with my wife, and we absolutely love it. We take time to just go out and have dates now and then. And it's something I put a lot of effort into. I put a lot of work into, and, I can easily measure myself against somebody and go like, well, I don't have as many followers, and I don't have as big of a company, and I haven't won any awards or whatever. But then I can go, but I do have this, which is super rare. And I'm starting to realize just like how rare it is as I talk to more and more couples, and as you look at, statistics of various things, and I'm like, oh, this is really rare what I have. And in that sense, it's more valuable than most of these other things. And valuing that is is something I think we need to take more seriously. You know, valuing your health and just being like, you know, I'm not as successful as this person, but I feel good about myself. I feel good about my
Mm-hmm.
life. I'm not having, crazy thoughts every week or whatever. Or I'm not, burnt out and feeling miserable and then having to turn to some sort of thing to cope. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
that's really, really valuable. And I think that the more we can focus on that, and I think that camp that you're working on, or I should say retreat, is it's a big part of that and helping people do that. And I think it's a really, really cool thing.
Yeah, I mean, the mental health thing 100% is real, and people are dealing with it even if they're not talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know, I mean, think about just screen time, right? And we're literally looking at screens all day.
Yeah.
So how is that like affecting us, like like just consciously, but we don't even really know, like we know something might be happening, right? But
Mm-hmm.
we can't put our finger on it. But yeah, I mean, again, just getting away from the computer allows you just to recharge. And again, it's those human connections. Like, thank goodness we have like Zoom and all these ways to stay connected with people. But no matter what, it never will replace in person, face-to-face
No,
contact.
no. Yeah.
And it's just really important to keep perspective on stuff too, because like for one, I can get super head down, work, or like trying to learn Houdini or like whatever it is, and just blinders on. And then all of a sudden, like this part of my life starting to slip, or like I'm not exercising, and just the ripple effect of all that and how that affects your health, your mental health, your relationships, just your overall energy and mood. It's really important, I think, just to be able to balance all that. And whether it's, spending time with family and friends, getting out and getting exercise, just taking a walk around the block to just breathe in some fresh air, all that stuff is really important. And I'm a big advocate of making sure that you're taking care of yourself first. And like, a paycheck's a paycheck. And people, I would say a lot of people I know will always like work as hard as they can to make sure the job is done, but they need to like also take care of themselves. So if I hire an artist, like, cool, we're done at like 5 or 6,
Mm-hmm.
now you're on, your time. If rarely, if ever, weekends, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, because honestly, I don't want to work those times.
Yeah.
I
Right.
want to be with my family.
Right.
So like, I want to run the project in a way where like everyone can just, turn off the machine at 6 o'clock. And, I've heard different interviews with like people from Odd Fellows or, what is it? Giant Ant, and where they have office hours and they encourage people just, at 6 o'clock, cool, we're done. And how effective and productive people are knowing that they've got this window,
Mm-hmm.
if that window is just wide open and you could potentially be there all night, then I don't know, you going to get an extra coffee, just the day is a little bit more lackadaisical,
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I think that's true. I think the amount of mental breakdowns that trying to learn Houdini is responsible for is extraordinarily high. There should be a class action lawsuit about the learning curve on that program. But yeah, I've probably tried like, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 times throughout my career to be like, I'm gonna do it this time.
Keep going, you'll keep pushing through.
We'll see. Right now I'm just hiring other people that know Houdini. I'm like, oh, you know what?
There you
I don't
go.
have to do everything. I can do what I love to do, and I can hire other people to do this other stuff.
Yeah.
And I keep hoping for more. I'm like, yeah, that's where everyone in the Cinema 4D world is like X particles, and now I'm like, ooh, Embergen. Like,
Right.
I keep hoping these other programs.
Shiny spheres
I can
everywhere.
avoid learning Houdini. Anything to let me avoid that makes me happy. Well, dude, thanks for talking so much. I think we should probably wrap it up here for the audience, but I would love to talk again soon about running the business, and maybe after the camp we can talk about how it goes.
Totally. Would love that.
And what your plans are for the future that come out of that. But it's been super, super great. Thank you so much for coming on, and I look forward to the next one.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.